I thank everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules to come out here and hearing Dr. Rand Paul. He's the head of the Kentucky Taxpayers United. He's also an ophthalmologist from Bowling Green. And he's formed an exploratory committee for the United States Senate for Kentucky. And ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rand Paul.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Many years ago, there was a congressman. He came out on the steps of the House, and there'd been a big budget vote, and it was nip and tuck. They didn't know which way it was going to go, and he came out and he voted for the budget. And the press asked him, they said, "Why did you decide to go? Why did you vote for the budget?" And he said, "Well, I went with the best deal." And the press looked at him and said, "Well, does that mean your vote's for sale?" And he said, "Well, no, but it's for rent." And that's kind of, we can chuckle and kind of think that's kind of funny, but you know, the thing about it is unfortunately that's the way things work in Washington, is that sometimes your vote's directly for sale. We had a great war hero who was a Republican, Duke Cunningham, an ace fighter from Vietnam, but he got corrupted by the system. He took money directly from defense contractors. That's not the way we should decide which weapon systems we have, by who bribes public officials. But sometimes it's indirect. Sometimes the bribes are in the form of campaign contributions. And that's not that I'm for saying we can't have these campaign contributions, but the thing is that's not what should drive which weapon systems we have, who gets a contract here and who gets a contract there. Now, many times the Democrats have sort of co-opted this issue, and actually some Republicans went along with them. They wanted to have campaign finance reform, and so you got McCain-Feingold. A Republican and a Democrat got together. The problem with their campaign finance reform was that they made it illegal for anybody to make an advertisement within 60 days of the election criticizing their officials. So, for example, I have a taxpayer group, and if someone ran for office and the election rolls around, I want to say Joe Smith voted to raise your taxes and buy an ad in the newspaper, it's illegal. So that, you know, to me tramples on the First Amendment, really, and also tramples on the political process if we can't buy advertising to criticize people in office. Well, this came about, and but yet people say, you know, the system is corrupt. Money's corrupting the system, and I think there is a certain amount of that. But I think there are other ways to look at that. I've written something recently on campaign finance reform, and I think the way you should go about it is, instead of preventing people from buying advertising, criticizing their officials, why don't we say that if you get more than $1 million contract from government, that you have a part or a clause within the contract that simply says, I promise not to lobby government while under the terms of this contract. If it's a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract or whatever, then you're voluntarily saying you're not going to do this. The government's not telling you not to do it. It's just that it's part of the agreement. When you have a federal contract, you have to agree to finish your road work by a certain time, but maybe you shouldn't be then lobbying for more road work during that time. Same way with different federal unions that work for the government, etc. The thing that probably motivates me most to run for office now, because it's not easy, it's a lot of work. This is the 3rd day in a row I've given speeches, and I've got a family and practice to do. But the main thing that motivates me to run for office now is the debt. We have an enormous deficit this year, $1.75 trillion. It's 13% of the gross national product. It's a larger debt than we've had at any time in our history, even larger now than what we had during World War II. Federal spending is 28% of gross national product. It's historically been around 20% in the last 10 or 20 years. So we're up to 28%. Many people have said that debt will be paid by our kids and our grandkids. And I think that's true, but I think it's going to be more immediate than that. I think it's more imminent, the threat of what will happen through deficit financing. Because there are different ways you pay for it. One way is you borrow. We borrowed $700 billion from the Chinese, $700 billion from the Japanese, over $100 billion from the Saudis, another $100 billion from the Taiwanese. We are the greatest debtor nation ever known to man. Some people have said, I know my father likes to repeat this, I'm not sure where it originated, but those who live beyond their means will eventually live beneath their means. And I think it's true of individuals. If you go out and you borrow on your credit card $100,000 and you can't pay it back, you're going to live beneath your means for a long time until you come out from under that. It's the same as a country. A country can get away with it for a longer period of time, though, because a country has a huge borrowing capacity. We have a taxing authority, but even with all of that, we're still short $1.75 trillion. We'll pay $150 billion next year just in interest on the debt. But the other way they pay for the debt is they basically print the money, and that comes from the Federal Reserve. When the Federal Reserve prints money, like for example in the last year the monetary base was doubled. The monetary base is then given to banks, but then banks loan it out and only have to keep 10% on hand. So it's multiplied 10 times more as it goes through the fractional reserve system. The danger is that we doubled the monetary base, which then can be multiplied another 10 times, that we're looking at a historic expansion of the money supply, and it hasn't come yet. That money is, a lot of it sitting in banks, and the Federal Reserve maintains, oh, we can pull it back out. When we start to see inflation, we'll pull it back out of the system. But my father asked an important question of Bernanke the other day, and he says, what do you do if you have 15% price inflation and 0% growth? So usually the central bankers say, oh, we have price inflation, we've got growth, we'll suck the money out and cut off the price inflation, and we'll get a little bit less growth. But they're petrified of taking money back out of the system if you have zero growth. And that's essentially kind of where we are now, zero growth and high unemployment. They're not going to be taking any money out of the system anytime soon. But what happens if within a year or two, as that money flows out into the system, you're going to the grocery store and your milk's $8 a gallon? I think this is the truth of what will happen. I think we may get 1979 or worse, and some of you I know remember what happened. We had 18 to 20% price inflation and interest rates mirroring that in 1979. That puts a stranglehold on the economy also. I see that coming. The thing about the message, and the message we have to get through if we are Republicans or if we're running as Republicans, is that it needs to be a message that the Republican Party is not just the party for those who belong to the country club or those who are wealthy. It's for those who believe in the American dream, but it's also for those who see that big government hurts people the worst, who are the working class and those who are on fixed income. And that's a message we need to articulate better than we have. I don't think we've done a good job articulating it. We also have sent confusing messages as a Republican Party. When we were in power for 8 years, the debt went from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. So we didn't do a very good job. Now it's a lot worse now. George Bush's last deficit was $500 billion, and Obama's tripled that in 1 year. So is it worse? Yes, in relative terms. But Obama will also shake his finger at the Republicans and he'll say, who are you to criticize me when you doubled the debt? He realizes it, the media realizes it, and you know who else realizes it? Is that block of voters who are independent. They're not necessarily Republican or Democrat. They might be conservative, and they say they don't, you know, Republicans always say you're for balance of the budget, but you don't ever do it. You don't ever cut any federal spending. I think those are the people who Republicans have lost because of the believability issue, and I think we can get those people back. They're independent voters, they're conservative Democrats, but they've grown a little bit tired of Republicans because Republicans have talked a good line but never fulfilled their line. I mean, for 30 some odd years we said we shouldn't have a Department of Education in Washington. That was Reagan's platform, and Reagan ran on it and won, and it was very popular. Not that we're against education, but that education should be done at the state and local level. And I think if we looked at the statistics and asked your judge executive about it, still most of the money is state and local money. It's a small portion that's federal, but there's no reason there should be any federal. The interesting alliance we might develop there is that I think No Child Left Behind is a disaster because it has more federal control and is more expensive and double the size of the Department of Education. But interestingly, the teachers don't like it either. And the teachers haven't always been Republican, but every teacher I talk to in my office hates No Child Left Behind. So there are some things that we can bring people together and grow the party larger. The other thing that I think we have to do as a party is we have to decide, you know, there are a lot of Republicans that sort of wear their values, their family values on their sleeve, and they want to be holier than thou, and then all of a sudden you see